our good friend and old friend, Herb Kaighan, is here. He's here tonight, and he's going to be here every first Monday of the next many months, I think, and as well as other times when he speaks with Alan Berger. But tonight he's going to start us on our journey through the 12 steps and looking at them with an emotional sobriety standpoint, but also looking at the principles that are connected to our program. So Herb, I'm pretty excited about this. I think it's an important thing to connect everything together so that we have a solid understanding of who we are, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm really, really glad you're here.
Thanks, Susie, very much. And thanks, Patrick, for initiating this very robust approach to our human development, our spiritual development. And I see those as flip sides of the same coin, not different aspects of the same journey. Are we spiritual beings seeking a human experience? Or are we human beings seeking a spiritual experience? You've heard it many times. I'm hoping that bringing it into this conversation at the very beginning of a very long conversation, not today, but over the spectrum of the next 2 years. Yes, Dr. Berger and I have signed up for 2 years with y'all. We began 2 months ago with an overall introduction and orientation to emotional sobriety. Both of us together. They've been recorded, so you could access those. I'm sure somebody in the chat will confirm how you can access that material. It's not a prerequisite to understanding today or any day because they're modular. You can come at any point and go into them and you will get something from them. But as Susie indicated, this is going to be a series, a serial, a unpacking over 2 years. And that's what she didn't say, but that's what it is. We worked it out with Patrick that I will make a commentary based on my knowledge and my experience of the steps, each step, and connect it to emotional sobriety and connect it to the core principle, something that's mouthed regularly by our fellows in the 12-step fellowship, practice these principles in all our affairs. And there's been efforts at defining what does that mean, but there's no official list of principles. Bill did not give us a list of principles. He referred to them, principles, that word, as a synonym, actually, for steps. Just check it out on page 60 and read it in the context of that. At the end of the step listing, he says we practice these principles, and he talked about that. Progress, not perfection. Wow, I hope you're hearing that, because I know there's 127 people on this call right now, and many more will listen to it. And over half of you, consciously or unconsciously, are perfectionists. You just want to cross the T's and dot the I's and get it right so that you'll be okay. Fortunately, Dr. Berger and I are also including not only in the steps and emotional sobriety and the principles, we're including a process that we've been involved in a panel discussion on a weekly basis on self-esteem. So that's another component to all of this that we're integrating into what we're going to be talking about. Today, I'm going to talk about step 1 and the core value and principle as I see it. I'm not certified or designated or knighted or authorized by anybody. So don't take this as official at all. This is very unofficial. This is Herb's observations, his knowledge, his journey, his interpretation. And quite frankly, it could change over the time that we're together because we become more conscious as we attempt to improve our consciousness. Hello, step 11. Sought to improve our consciousness? Well, if that's an honest effort and God is real, and I'm willing to show up and practice, I'm going to become more conscious. Today, I'm more conscious than I was in January when I began a process of looking at the steps again. And so it's an iterative process, an organic process. I will talk about step 1 from my viewpoint, from my experience, connected to emotional sobriety, connected to principles and core values. And then next month, Dr. Berger will talk on the same subject, but he'll come from a more inclusive and broader commentary from his psychological background. And then the third month, that is today's May, June, he will be single. And in July, we will be together to have a dialogue about our respective commentaries. It'll be very organic and it'll be very spontaneous, as you know if you've watched us at all together. So that's a basic orientation to what we're talking about, principles. And if you, excuse me, I have a little morning frog. I would suggest at some point taking the time, your time, to look up the word principles in a dictionary and write it out. Perhaps you'll have a separate binder or a notebook or something for keeping track of the comments and your work and your dictionary work and your thoughts and reflections and responses to mine and Dr. Berger's comments. We're going to be at it, 12 steps, 12 principles connected to those steps in the context of emotional sobriety and even self-esteem for 2 years. That gives me the gift of living that long. I think Susie said something about old friends. I prefer long-term friends, but be that as it may, both of us are, we're on the second 9 holes, if you don't mind a golf analogy. This is a dynamic process. We've already introduced the set-aside prayer. It's a prayer because I can't set it aside. Oh, I want to, and I'm willing to, and I try to, but I'm as powerless to set aside my ideas, my knowledge, my experience, but I'm really invested in them consciously and unconsciously. And so I ask the Spirit, whatever that means to you, the Spirit of the universe, to enter into my heart and into my mind and open it up. Questions are the best way. One of my teachers is Richard Rohr. And he says, ask the question in the milieu of prayer, in the environment of prayer, and hold the question. Hold the asked but unanswered question. Hold it. And allow it to percolate. The question. Be okay with an unanswered question. Get some information. We've got 2 years of a journey that we will be getting incremental information. You don't have to come to conclusion by Sunday. Allow yourself to hold these questions, perhaps even till 2 years from now, if you have the patience and the diligence to show up with us and or to listen to, watch the recordings that will be placed someplace that they'll make you aware of, there will be a sequence, there will be an organic integration of this information, although it's modular and you will get something from each one individually. But take the action that is indicated in the conversation. Now, there'll be conversation and presentation from myself here, and then there'll be time for dialogue with you. So there may be questions or comments or even experiences that you have that will benefit and help build into this as an organic whole. But be prepared to be surprised with experiences and allow that experience to broaden and deepen or add to the questions that you've asked yourself or that the Spirit whispers in your heart as another. Well, so what does that mean? What are the implications of that? What's your experience? What does it mean in terms of your life and your actions? Einstein said it wonderfully. The consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. I cannot, with the mind that has created the problem, come up with the solution that solves the problem, because embedded in the solution that comes from a demented mind is a delusional solution. And you know that from your own journey. So ask yourself. You don't have to answer it, but please ask it today, right now, here. Doesn't matter whether you're sober or abstinent. If you are, terrific. But where's your life not working? The best kept secret in the rooms is about unmanageability. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. It's my mantra over the last couple of years. It's my mantra question. It's my mantra confrontation with the 12-step community. We have a tendency to fall asleep dreaming that we're awake. That's a line from Gurdjieff, a Russian philosopher. Most human beings are asleep dreaming that they're awake. And we blah, 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 serenity prayer, blah, 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 set aside prayer, blah, 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 St. Francis prayer, blah, 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 blah. And we're just mouthing words. There's nothing in our heart. There's nothing in our consciousness. It's not our fault. We just are human beings and we're robots and zombies. And maybe that's the reason for the proliferation of zombie movies. It represents our current culture. Wake up. That's what this is about. Be conscious. Where's my life not working? Not quantitatively necessarily, although that might be an issue, but qualitatively. Do you have a life that flourishes? That's the promise of the big book and the 12-step process, and it's my personal experience. My life has flourished for 35 years. Sober, February 21st, 1984. Do the math, I'm 39 years sober. Those first 5 years, I was abstinent from alcohol, but my insides were racked with unmanageability, and I was unconscious that I was unconscious. Restless, irritable, and discontented. Oh, now that didn't work very well. Let's see if I can fix that. There we go. So how effective are my efforts? I went to a meeting every day for those first 5 years. I had a sponsor I talked to every day. I went to step studies and book studies. I was under the delusion that I was a good AA, but it was a delusion because I hadn't changed. But I didn't know that I didn't know that I hadn't changed. Do you really want your life to change? Do you really want your behavior to change? Do you really want the consequences of your actions to change? Well, What specific change would you like? These are not academic questions, by the way. These are not throwaway questions. Herb, get to the good stuff. No, this is the good stuff. It was the questions that I held with a willingness of an open mind and open heart, and then received some information, and then got some action, and then had an experience that gave me some more questions. And one of the best questions that I've come to, and I use it every day as the conclusion of my morning practice, and I have a consistent morning practice of asking for guidance. I ask, what's today's invitation? Yeah. And then I listen. And it may be dramatically different, or it may be just shades of gray, not really clear, but I allow the day to manifest the invitation. You know what 12 Steps says, having had a spiritual awakening. Again, we become brain dead to that. I challenge you to challenge yourself. Do you really know what a spiritual awakening is? And if you don't, read Appendix 2 in the back of the big book, page 567, 568. Bill took some pains in the second printing of the first edition of the big book in 1941 to change step 12. Yep. The only substantial change in the internal document, the pages 1 to 164, that's ever been done, substantial, not statistics, but substantial. He changed spiritual experience to spiritual awakening and then explained it in Appendix 2. They're the same product, a change. An experience is mystical, mountaintop, immediate, dramatic. Awakening is like a dimmer switch, very slow, gradual, glacially slow in my case, over time. But nevertheless, the result's the same, a change in the way we think and feel and behave, which is very correlated to how we're built in terms of our brain structure. I'm not going to do a teaching on the brain, but if you don't know this, this is an important model. Bill had it in his mind as I interpreted his presentation and his organization of the big book with regard to the step process. He understood that we have a body that's managed by the brain stem, physical sobriety. That very first brain developed millions of years ago. I have a carrot symbolizing the vegetative brain. It's a survival brain, the lizard brain, satisfying our thirst and our hunger and our need to mate. But millions of years later, we developed a limbic system, a second brain. This is emotional sobriety here. This is the reason that we need emotional sobriety. We have instincts, fight, flight, and freeze in the carrot category, but we have emotions that come out of those instincts in the limbic system, resentment and fear and dishonesty and shame. But fortunately, millions of years later, we develop this third brain, this cortex, this neocortex. It allows us to know and to decide voluntarily, free will. We're the only sentient beings that has this component, that we can self-reflect. We can ask ourselves questions and witness the question and hold the question, and then voluntarily come to decide the answer and to take the actions based on that. Civilization's been created, all civilizations been created on the basis of free will. The individual has responsibility to know better, to do better, and to take full responsibility for the consequences of their action. That's a summary of emotional sobriety. To know what the principles are, to operate on the basis of principles, to have an outcome that's in congruence with those principles, so that I fit into society. a spiritual awakening, a change in the way we think and feel and behave. Our minds and will, our emotions, and how our feet move. Here's one of the challenges I offer many people. If they're willing to see it not as a confrontation, but as a reflection, your feet tell you what your principles are, what your values are. Your feet, your behavior. They will tell you what you believe. If you're not praying and meditating on a daily basis, you don't believe that you're powerless. If you're not praying and meditating on a daily basis, perhaps you don't believe that there is a power available to you. If you're not praying and meditating on a daily basis, perhaps you believe that you don't need power on a daily basis. I don't apologize for offending your feelings. I'm inviting you to reflect on your behavior because it tells you who you are. It tells you what your values are. It tells you what your principles are. Your head will lie to you. Your heart will lie to you. At least if you're like me, a human being. But my feet are very objective. When I look back over my shoulder, my feet tell me exactly what I believe, exactly what I value. If I'm not going to bed on time, it's because it's not of value to me. These are personal observations of my current consciousness that I get hijacked by self-indulgence. I get hijacked by rationalization. Oh yeah, 39 years sober, quite conscious, a life that flourishes. Oh yeah, daily balance is my dilemma. Lack of balance is my dilemma. Spiritual awakening, a change in the way we think and feel and behave. It's done to us, grace, not by us, but we need to be willing. And there's the mystery, because it's not done without us. There's that combination of grace and willingness, a mystery I cannot explain, but a reality that I can observe and experience and talk about in retrospect mostly. So what are these principles under each step? The principles of emotional sobriety, the principles of spiritual sobriety. There's probably not much difference, although I do make a distinction between them. Emotions, I think, are managed most specifically by step 10. I call that the tool of emotional sobriety. A recap of steps 1 through 9. And then steps 11 and 12, I call spiritual sobriety, the coin of the integration of the mind and the will to know better and to do better. Step 11, a relationship with God. Step 12, a relationship with people. The turning that is precipitated by steps 1 through 9, sustained by step 10, that turning from self-centeredness to other-centeredness, other with a capital O, step 11, other with a small o, step 12. It's arbitrary. It's just my way of approaching and organizing and understanding and practicing this phenomenal process of transformation. But here we are at step 1. You've heard it so many times, please listen. I've changed it a little bit because not all of you are alcoholics. I know that. At least that's my hope, that people from any 12-step program, and all 12-step programs are here and represented. You may not be alcoholic, but if you're here, there's highly likely you're in a 12-step program dealing with some form of addiction. Addiction. Repetitive behavior over which I have no control, which leads to negative consequences. Herb's definition. It's not official. It's not scientific. It's observational. It's very practical. repetitive behavior over which I have no control. That's not poetry. That's experience, which leads to negative consequences that deteriorates the quality and eventually the quantity of my life. But no, that's an important aspect of step one, but it's the first half. And it's not the most important. If you read the big book carefully, Bill says this very carefully in many places. Addiction is not the problem. It's a problem. Unmanageability is the problem. And that's the best kept secret in the rooms. What do we mean by unmanageability? The spiritual malady, the cancer of the soul Bill talks about. Dash. He doesn't say and. Look at page 59 in the big book where he lists the steps. There's no and, it's a dash. Bill is very conscious and very careful about the use of language. Why didn't he use an and? Why did he use a dash? This is not Kaighan perfectionism. This is a deliberate intent to understand what was in Bill's mind. What was he trying to communicate to us? Some of it perhaps consciously, some of it perhaps unconsciously. That dash means it's a new thought. It's still under the umbrella of step one, powerless. Now we become so brain dead to the word powerless, I suggest a synonym. Hear me, please. When you think or say powerless, try to think or say no choice. No choice. I'm in the bondage of addiction. I'm certainly in the bondage of unmanageability. I don't know that I don't know. I can't see that I don't see. And I need help. Some of our addictions are listed here. Substance addiction is alcohol, drugs, and food. Pretty straightforward because there's a substance involved. The professionals talk about process addiction now. I've added some to this list if you've seen it before. I'm not going to read it. You can read it. There's no substance in sex addiction. There's no substance in gambling. There's no substance in anger, unless you consider the adrenaline and the emotional chemical transformation that happens. But there's no substance that I'm ingesting. There's a process that I'm engaging in. And once I do, I lose control. The whole point of step one, first the body and then the mind. I have no choice in addiction. It's not relevant to the majority of people in Northern America. North America, I don't know about outside of North America. I've only read science in the North America English-speaking languages. Probably true throughout the world, but I don't know that. I'm not a scientist, but I read stuff. Addiction, 10% are alcoholic. That's pretty clear. 50% have some other form of addiction, maybe even addiction to the alcoholic or addiction to the addict. We call them the Al-Anons or the similar organizations connected to the primary addiction organization. But notice it's only a percentage. Now I've used the word no choice. No choice. But the real problem is unmanageability. It's in a different color. It's in capital letters. I believe this is the translation on page 84, why Bill says we're not cured. On page 84, he says we are placed in a position of neutrality with regard to our addiction. I'm saying it a little differently, but as clearly as I believe he means it in the context of the words there. Placed in a position of neutrality with regard to our addiction when we finish steps 1 through 9. But then he immediately says, but we're not cured. Well, not cured of what? Well, it's not addiction. He's already addressed that, neutrality. It must mean unmanageability. At least this is my interpretation. We're not cured of our unmanageability. We're not cured of our spiritual malady. We're not cured of our selfishness and self-centeredness, which he describes on pages 60 to 62. If you haven't read that material with this consciousness, read it or reread it. Pages 60 to 62 in the big book. Read it with the personal pronoun present tense, as if it's applied to your today, as you're sitting there, maybe with a day of sobriety or a decade of sobriety or more than that. Is your life unmanageable? This is what it looks like when you take page 52, that second paragraph called the bedevilment paragraph. Bedevilment, to be controlled as if by devils. And I'm not even slightly, subtly connoting any religious implication here. None. It's poetry. Bedevilment is in the paragraph, the second paragraph. And so I use it on page 52, and I use it again in the present tense and personal pronoun. I am having trouble with personal relationships, 10 years sober, having had 2 major spiritual awakenings, one at 5 years and one at 8 years. And I'm doing the steps for the 3rd time with a 3rd man. And I want a divorce from a marriage of 25 years. I am having trouble with personal relationships. I'm having trouble at work because of my personal relationships. I'm a jerk. I have not changed significantly enough for me to have partnership relationships, to use Bill's terms from the 12 and 12. I can't control my emotional nature. On a scale of 1 to 10, I was a 2 or 3. I was fine. I had some stability thanks to lots of therapy with Dr. Berger. I am a prey to misery and depression. Scale of 1 to 10, it was a 2 or 3, not really. I have been gifted with the genetics of a very positive energy and attitude, no matter what's going on. So that really wasn't my issue. I can't make a living that satisfies me. Well, I'm adding that satisfies me, because that was what, in my meditation, the Spirit yelled at me. I said, how does that apply to me? I have a wonderful job. I have a profession. They pay me a lot of money. How does that apply to me? I can't make a living. And this voice was so clear. Herb, you're never satisfied. You're a bottomless pit. You're a black, deep, dark hole. You have this yearning that is never filled by adulation or money or power or sex or pleasure or success, are you? Wow, okay. Yes, 10 years sober, that was true. Oops, look at that. I don't know how that happens, but let's get back to it. I have a feeling of uselessness, not so much, again, scale of 1 to 10, at the 2 or 3 level, very minor feelings. Fear wasn't really much of a problem for me. Anger was my problem, but I also discovered that shame, dishonesty was my problem. I did not know that shame was a feeling. I don't know much about feelings at that time in my recovery. I had done a lot to ignore them and or to consciously stamp them out. I am unhappy. I was reasonably okay. Scale of 1 to 10, I was a 5 probably. But then it came to this, I can't seem to be of real help to other people. How does that apply to me? I said, I take these questions very seriously. I can't seem to be of real help to other people. I studied to be a Catholic priest for 7 years in a monastery. 7 years. I left because I didn't want to teach and preach and help people, which is kind of ironic, given what I do for the last 35 years. But be that as it may, I didn't want to help people. I wanted the reputation of helping people. I wanted the Roman collar and the respect. In those days, 50s and 60s, the Catholic priest was the highest ranking profession in a Catholic family. Well, at least in my limited view. When I didn't do that, I thought I'd become a psychologist because, of course, I wanted to, quote, help people. That's not really true. As I looked at it in meditation, I wanted the reputation, I wanted the credentials, I wanted the adulation, and I certainly wanted the power and the money that came with it. And the wee small voice got very loud with me. Herb, you're not really interested in helping people. You want the reputation of helping people. It was very embarrassing 10 years sober to be confronted with my narcissism, which was being revealed to me not only in the pages 60 to 62, but in my conversations with Dr. Berger as I was trying to iron out the wrinkles in my soul and my emotions. So I saw that I was handicapped, not now with addiction, 10 years sober, doing the steps a couple of times. This was the third time. I was handicapped by unmanageability. I was still a victim. I did not know that there was no walls and there was no ceiling, there was no floor to the jail that I had created and placed myself in. And if only I would release those bars and drop the bars, I would have freedom. This is emotional sobriety. Coming to a point where you take full responsibility for your life. You take a look at your thoughts, you take a look at your feelings, but you take a look at your behavior, as I perhaps painfully described at the beginning of my comments, and you drop the bars and you walk free. I'm holding the bars. There's nothing else holding the bars. This is our way of living, Bill says in step 12, practicing principles. Well, he doesn't give us a list, but he gives us a chapter 8 to the wives. Today it would be called, in our current language, to our significant relationship. Read that chapter looking for principles, the core values, the guidelines and guardrails. Chapter 9, the family afterward. There's no list of principles dealing with the family, but read it looking for the connotations and the subtle references to the principles, the values, the guidelines, the guardrails. To the employer, chapter 10. Same with work. Chapter 11 has a poetic title, as you know, A Vision for You. It's wonderful. It sets a wonderful vision and a model looking forward that we can build our hope and guide our behavior along this path. Bill calls it our way of life, which is a noun. I put it much more action-oriented, our way of living. This is how my feet move, according to these principles. And when you read chapter 11, A Vision for You, you can see the principles in your fellowship and the principles in your community and the principles in your public relationships. And so I've come to the conclusion, using the principles that I've seen many lists of principles from many people, and they're wonderful. They're wonderful stepping stones to coming up with your own interpretation of what the principle is. I'm not saying this is right. I'm not saying this is the final development. I'm not saying that this is where I'll end up even 2 years from now when we finish this project of reviewing these principles. But I think that first principle, step 1, is honesty. And it's correlated with page 58. If you haven't read it recently in the light of what I'm about to say, then read it. The chapter 5, page 58, begins and spends 2/3 of the page talking about honesty and rigorous honesty. And the only thing that Bill says there is we need to have the capacity. He said there are some people who don't have the capacity. Perhaps they're sociopaths or psychopaths, my interpretation. Because he, in the next comment there on page 58, he says there are those that are emotionally and mentally damaged. Emotionally and mentally. He's making a distinction. 2 different words, absolutely. We would use the term trauma today. We would use the word in some form of either biological or psychological damage. But he says those people can get this thing if they have the capacity, meaning that there is some room for honesty. He said the only people who will fail are the people who have no room, not their fault. It could be biology, it could be psychology, some form of trauma, but the capacity for honesty is squeezed out. And then he uses the term rigorous. You'll note in the big book, read it with this consciousness. When he uses a word, he puts a jackhammer word in front of it. I don't know whether that's an adverb or what the nomenclature is. Rigorous honesty. Is that an adjective, an adverb? I don't know. It doesn't matter. But it's a jackhammer word that says not just honesty, rigorous honesty, diligent effort. Notice. He's asking us to step up with a rigor. Be careful, perfectionists. Anything we do with willingness is good enough. I hope you hear this, everybody, but especially the perfectionists. There's nothing perfect here. And he makes a big point of that at the end of the steps, page 60. Progress, not perfection. A practice of 10, 11, and 12. Practice, and it's a lie you hear this. It's kind of a wisdom saying, and I understand the spirit of it. Practice does not make perfect. Practice makes progress. There's a line in the big book. I understand its intent and I embrace the spirit of it, but on the surface of it, it's just not correct. Half measures availed us nothing. No, half measures availed us something. Whatever you do with a clear conscience and the intention of making progress is good enough, and it will be good enough. I did a 4-step autobiography in my first year. By my standards, in my second time I went through the steps, it was pitiful. But in my first year, it was the best I could do, and it was good enough. The inventory I did in my 5th year was really good, but it wasn't by standards at 10 years of sobriety as good. But it was good enough at 5 years. I hope you hear this, everybody. You sit and you do your prayer and meditation and you do it for a minute or you do it for 30 minutes and it's never enough and it's always distracted and it's kind of like, oh, what a waste of time. No. The intent of sitting for 1 minute, the intent of sitting for 30 minutes, no matter what happens in between, is just none of your business. The effort is your responsibility and it's good enough. The results are just none of your business. If you're not getting the results that you want, talk to somebody about what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what are the principles, and how can you course correct to get the outcomes that you want. This is emotional sobriety, course correction. We're in a flow. We're in a flow. There's this God's reality that's manifesting by evolution. It's organic evolution. Material reality disintegrates and integrates. It's a moving river, and we step into the river with free will. And when we go against principles of reality, we are crushed and we suffer. And the whole point of the turning that Bill asks us in step 3 is to turn to be in alignment. The word's not in the big book, but it's my word for what the intent is of step 3 is to be in alignment with the flow. I turn my will and my life over to the care of God. I do not turn my will and my life over to God. It's a huge distinction. We'll talk more about it when we get to the 3rd step. I am responsible for my life. God is not responsible for my life. I am responsible to drive my car. God does not drive my car. I am empowered to drive my car, but I must listen to guidance like the GPS so that I don't get hijacked by my self-will and my delusion that I am constantly reorganizing and course correcting to be in alignment, because when I am out of alignment, I suffer, and the yellow blinking light on the dashboard tells me that I need more air or more water or more gas or whatever it is, and I course correct. And I listen and I listen and I listen, and I make efforts and I make mistakes, but I am not a mistake. And I have the intention of being a decent human being and living according to principles and sorting it out. Notice I have the two words that are best for me in terms of principles: guidelines and guardrails. I mentioned, I think, in my opening comments that balance is my dilemma. The big book says lack of power. Yeah, I can see that. Lack of willpower and lack of knowledge power, absolutely. I have bruises on both of my shoulders from hitting the sides of the corridor that I'm walking because I lose balance on a daily basis. Bruises aren't so bad. The deviations are not so gross these days. Guidelines and guardrails. The big book says on page 58, step 59, step 1, admit powerless. But read the one on page 30, concede to our innermost self. Much more powerful. Concede to our innermost self. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently maybe, or ever will be, has to be smashed. That's step 1. My ego and my self-reliance needs to be smashed. And I don't mean in the sense of erasing me as an individual or eliminating myself. No, I do not mean that. I mean the renovation, rehabilitation of the false self, as Dr. Berger talks about. So that, in fact, I can see clearly and act honestly. Where I have a mind power based on steps 4 through 7, and a willpower based on steps 8 and 9, so that my mind is sufficient and my will is effective, in contrast to when I first come to these steps. No choice. Surrender is a term that I like for step 1, not step 3. Step 1, surrender. I need to implode into just the realization I need help. I need help. To be honest with myself, I need help. It's a process, as I've mentioned, not an event. This physical sobriety is guaranteed by the end of steps 1 through 9. Emotional sobriety is the gift of the practice of step 10. Spiritual sobriety is the gift of the practice of step 11 and 12, that coin I mentioned, 2 sides, one coin, a relationship with other and a relationship with others. But as he says, not cured, daily reprieve. That dimmer switch goes down a notch at a time with a little unmanageability that's not treated. The ignoring the yellow blinking light on the dashboard of our life and going, no, it'll be different this time. Oh, no, I've got it. I don't need to be rigorous. I mean, this is a white lie. I mean, who's going to get hurt? No, there are no white lies. Are you a little pregnant? No. White lie is a lie. It's dishonest. This, you hear it, the path gets narrower, and it does in the sense of walking principles, but the road gets wider because there's more freedom. There's the paradox of this process. We live by principles and our life gets huge. But if we don't live by principles, and I read it in an author not connected to 12-step, Essentially, I'm going to paraphrase it. He said the relapse is not the drink or the drug or the slip in behavior. The relapse is not the drink or the drug or the slip of behavior. That's the evidence of the relapse. The relapse happened yesterday or last week or last month or even last year. He said it's the first compromise of principles. I'm going to repeat that. That was one of the most powerful statements I'd ever heard. Relapse comes from the first compromise of our principle. That's the slippery slope. It doesn't feel like it's slippery, that we've deviated off the path of the rigor of rigorous honesty. And our mind will cut us slack, given to that obsession, that delusion that we saw Bill talk about in pages 23 to 43, and captured, I believe, in Fred's story. If you haven't looked at that, look at pages, I think 40 to 42 or something like that. And he talks about the strange mental blank spot. Boy, that's where I live if I'm not spiritually fit. I don't know that I don't know, and I can't see that I don't see. And that's not poetry. And it's not cutting me any slack. I'm taking full responsibility for it, because when I practice my meditation in the morning, I'm given the gift of sight. I'm given the gift of hearing, the guidance from my heart, from my soul, from the spirit in me. Spirit comes from the Greek word spiros, breath, the breath of God. Very hard to talk about steps 2 and 3. It's like trying to define or catch the wind. The breath of God that fills the sails of the sailboat and empowers the sailboat to move forward in a direction that the sailor is using the tiller to guide. Wonderful poetic image of this process. The power of the breath of the spirit. But when the obsession returns, it hijacks me. And I begin to engage in my addiction, and the craving returns because it's like the allergy of doctor opinion. The process of recovery goes up a notch at a time, like the dimmer switch, but it also goes down a notch at a time. Both of them so subtle we don't know the lights are going bright or the lights are going down. Are you walking toward the light or are you walking toward the darkness? Wake up. Bill said it. We don't need rules. We don't need regulations. We don't need monitoring. There's only 2 disciplines in Alcoholics Anonymous. Brilliant statement. There's only 2 disciplines. One is God and one is alcohol. You're either going for one or you're going for the other. Notice there's no resting on our laurels. There's no neutral here. The dimmer switch is either going up or it's going down. I like to see myself as leaning with my shoulder into the dimmer switch, moving it forward. Because Dr. Thibault, the psychiatrist that helped Bill early on, both personally as well as with the construction of the program, a psychiatrist, he said, Bill got it right. The first 9 steps are for the deflation of the ego at depth. Hear it. The first 9 steps are for the deflation of the ego, meaning the false self, at depth. But the ego has an uncanny way of regenerating itself. That's what step 10 is all about. That signal on the dashboard, that feeling of emotion that disturbs us. Remember in step 10 in the 12 and 12? Whenever we are disturbed, it's a spiritual axiom. Whenever we are disturbed, there's something wrong with me. And I saw that and realized that in steps 4 through 7. And I take responsibility now when I'm not feeling balanced, when I'm not feeling integrated, when I'm not feeling that I'm in the light. that there's some darkness, some disturbance. I love the word disturbance because it covers a multitude of mischief. I pause. I pray. I talk to somebody. And eventually I turn my thoughts to helping somebody and my actions to helping somebody. A recap of step 10. To get back from being out of alignment with reality to being in alignment with reality. The dimmer switch goes up a notch at a time subtly. The dimmer switch goes down a notch at a time subtly. That's why sponsorship is so important. Accountability, whatever you call it, an accountability partner, to talk to somebody transparently about what you're thinking and feeling and doing. That was the instruction I got, and I followed, and I was willing to, and progressively over time, I got more honest. Addiction is a problem, but it's not the problem. The process of steps 1 through 9 guarantee, page 84, I'm not in hyperbole here. Read it. Placed in a position of neutrality. Read the second title page of the big book, the page with a little more writing on it. It says how thousands of men and women have recovered. Hello, that's past tense. Neutrality. But we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve. We need to learn how to drop the rock, as one of the books says, about steps 6 and 7. We need to drop the bars, take full responsibility for any irritation or annoyance or disturbance in our life. It's never circumstances or events or people. Hello. It's never circumstances, events, or people. It's always my reaction to circumstances, events, and people. Principles of emotional sobriety, when lived, is the turning from our disease, whatever that is, if it's the addiction, to at ease. Abstinence or moderation, depending on whether it's a substance addiction or a process addiction. The process addictions are much more difficult. The substance addiction in the food area is the most impossible. It's the most difficult one. The food addiction. I've been dealing with the different 12-step programs of food addiction for over 15 years. I don't have it. I'm not in the program, but I'm attempting to help people, and I'm listening to their navigation of their own addiction. Because it's so personal, it's so individual, it's not black and white like most of the others are fairly black and white, even process addictions. The food addiction is not. It's very individual. But the key to it, and read page 64, as Bill enters into step 4, he said, we have a physical and a mental problem, but we have a spiritual problem. And when the spiritual problem is taken care of, the mental and the physical problem take care of themselves. I'm paraphrasing, but read it. Page 64, as he's entering into step 4, he tells us addiction is a problem. It's just not the problem. Unmanageability is the problem. We're not cured, and we have a daily reprieve. We can manage our life. I have managed my life for 35 years. Since I did the steps the first time, and I got the experience that I'm not a victim, that I am in fact a perpetrator of any of the negative consequences of my life, 100%. My life is exactly the one I have created. Wow, you talk about confrontational and in your face. Each one of you right now listening to this might not like this, but you have exactly the life that you've created. I don't use the term fault. I use the term responsible. I am responsible for my life, and I need to be rigorously honest about that. Until I am, I'm blaming somebody else, and I'm waiting for somebody to save me. No one's coming. One of the words that Nathaniel Brandon used in his work. He was the author of the self-esteem material that we're looking at. He said, nobody's coming. Oh my God. Listen to it. No, God's not coming. If there is such a thing as God, and I do believe there is, God's already here. All I need is to access that power. It's like somebody gave me the analogy in one of my workshops. God is like oxygen. Wow. I need oxygen to survive. I need to breathe in the air. The air is already part, warp and woof of my very existence. I don't know it, I don't feel it, but I know that oxygen is necessary. And so I need to breathe in and I need to breathe out. Spiros, spirit, breath. I need to clean out in me the obstacles to oxygen. And I need to plug into oxygen on a daily basis so that I refresh the life force that gives my life force the ability to live comfortably, to use my will properly. Bill gives us the prayer, thy will be done. It's a perfect prayer. With my free will, I am saying thy will. With my free will, I'm saying, God, please show me. With my free will, I'm saying, please help me. With my free will, I'm saying, please actually bring me across the goal line. I can march down the field pretty well with some knowledge and some effort, but I can't get across the goal line, to stay with a sports image here. I was delivered. Bill says in one of his talks, he was delivered on the mountaintop in the third day of his hospitalization. He said, in looking back on it, he says, I was delivered. I just love that term. All right. But I got to be on the playing field. I've got to be taking instructions. I've got to be taking some actions. Using my will, either to be out of alignment or to be in alignment. That's emotional sobriety. Using my free will to say, thy will be done, and to understand what that means in terms of my actions.